What if the reason your sales team isn't closing deals isn't the market, but the slow dilution of your company's original genius? In today's episode of the Mike Method, you're going to hear how Simon Bowen helps founders and executive teams capture their unique brilliance in a way that makes their business instantly more believable, memorable, and scalable. Simon is an international business mentor, keynote speaker, and creator of the Models Method, a framework that's been used in over 30 countries and translated into 9 languages. Simon is the mind behind the Genius Model, a visual communication method that has helped companies close hundreds of millions of dollars in complex sales by transforming messy, abstract thinking into clear, persuasive visual models. In this episode, we dive deep into why most companies struggle not with commoditization in the market, but with internal dilution, a slow erosion of the founder's thinking as the sales team scales. Simon unpacks why believability, not trust, is the true currency in complex sales, and why companies need to shift from telling their story to showing their genius. We also explore how boom and bust markets require entirely different sales strategies and how to reposition your offer without losing your value. Whether you're selling warships to the Navy or consulting services to Fortune 500s, Simon's thinking will help you clarify your message, increase influence, and accelerate growth. Let's dive in. Simon, I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure.
So one of the things that you love to talk about is there are sort of 3 key areas of success for companies. And in your experience, we don't talk enough about one of the key ones. And what is that?
Yeah. We actually don't talk about it at all.
Okay.
So if you think about a company really of any size, every company started with a founder, right? And it started with a founder idea. And so as companies grow, we think about a company should exist for a purpose. Imagine that at the top. And we dress that up in labels like vision and mission. And, for me, the jury's out on whether that's actually, what has that actually done? Because I've sat in many executive boardrooms and said to the people around the table, well, what's the vision and mission of your company? And they're all scrambling through the paperwork, right, to find out where they've written it down somewhere. And I've usually, committed to memory before I'm in there with them. And so, it's interesting. It's an interesting sort of exercise. But anyway, we have a purpose, let's call it that, right? And the purpose is kind of one of 2 things, but ideally both. It's commercial, which means we started this company to make money, which is self-sustaining. It's fine. The other kind of purpose is a cause or a crusade. We started this company to do something meaningful. Now, if you have an organization that is just cause-based, we call that charity. It doesn't have commercial strength, so it's not driving revenue. And so they have to go and ask for handouts, right? The ideal company has both commercial and cause at a purpose level. And at the bottom of this hierarchy, we want to have impact on the marketplace. So impact meaning a meaningful difference to the people we serve, right, and the community we belong to. So down the middle, that translation occurs through 3 kind of pathways. One of them is organizational design. So what's the hierarchy of the organization, the structure of the organization, the standard operating procedures that we're going to work through, workflows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, there are multiple models for that help us understand organizational design. For example, the McKinsey 7S model, which is not really 7 S's. They had to turn purpose into shared values to get the 7th S, right? Or shared value, but 7 dimensions of organizational design. On the other side, we have culture. So leadership, values, and team and individual performance, right? I mean, if we think about what is culture, culture is how individuals perform in the collective. It's probably the simplest way for me to describe it, right? And that means there's leaders and team members and everything else. So you've got these 2 pathways from purpose down to impact. Organizational design says to the marketplace, oh, they're consistent. That's what organizational design creates, consistency. And therefore we can rely on them because this organization will show up consistently. And down the other side with culture, the culture says to the market, we have character. The character of the organization. I'd much rather talk about the character of the organization than the culture of the organization. Mm-hmm. If we use features and benefit thinking, the culture is the feature, the character is the benefit. Mm-hmm. And so, every leader should be asking themselves, what is the character of my organization? Not what is the culture of my organization? Mm-hmm. The character is the external expression. And so when the market says this company has character at a subconscious level, therefore we can trust them. So we can rely on them because they're consistent. We can trust them because they have character. And yet trust is not the most important thing in commercial transactions. Now, we know everyone talks about the currency of trust and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to make a sale, particularly on a high ticket item or a complex product or service, we work with companies that sell complex solutions into sophisticated markets, right? So if you're in that world, trust is not the main currency in the sale. Believability is. Can I believe them? So I can go, Mike's a great guy. I trust him, but I don't know that I can believe his advice on this.
Right.
Because how do I know he knows what he's talking about? But he's a great guy. I trust him, and, he's consistent in the way he shows up. He's professional. He's always on time, really structured, organized. But can I believe him? And I went on the hunt for what is this thing down the middle that makes an organization believable. And I started to realize it was company genius. Everyone's selling products and services down the bottom, which is just the vessel through which genius is packaged. But what sits above it is what is the genius of the company. And so that genius says to the marketplace, they are really capable. Therefore, we can believe them. They have character. We can trust them. They're really capable. Therefore, we can believe them on any product they bring to market. And they are consistent. Therefore, we can rely on them. We can trust them. We can believe them. We can rely on them. And that shifts everything. And yet we never talk about company genius. And I'll draw a model in a minute, but I went hunting for the origins of company genius, because what I ended up doing with it was I turned it into what I now call the genius model, where we can codify the entire genius of a company into a single visual model that takes 7 to 10 minutes to explain. And so if you build ships for navies and you're going to a procurement meeting for multi-billion-dollar, contract, and every other ship builder has a 45 to 60-minute presentation on what they do, and you walk in 7 to 10 minutes and explain, here's how we build and sustain naval ships in battle, and the most senior naval officer says, how come no one else explained it that simply and quickly for me? You are, this far away from that multi-billion-dollar deal. Because what you've just done is you've gone, here's how we approach this. Then we'll talk about our solution, our product, our offer, if you like. And so you're framing it. And, so I went on the hunt for company genius. Like, what is company genius? Where does it actually come from? I in a second, I'll draw a little model that I call the origins of company genius, because there's a really important thing in there that founders particularly kind of really need to hold front and center in their minds. But, so these three streams, and the one we never talk about is company genius. We do vision, mission, values, which is, okay, this is who we are, and here's what we want to do, but we don't do, and here's how we do it at a company genius level. And, everyone kind of locked onto Simon Sinek's, find your why. And people don't buy what you do. Simon said, people don't buy what you do until they know why you do it. And I don't actually agree with that. And every time I say that at a conference, there's this big sucking in of breath as I say it. It's like, what do you mean you don't agree? Simon says, people don't buy what you do until they know why you do it. I think it'd be more accurate to say people don't buy what you do until they know that they are the reason why you do it. That is a subtle but important difference. And then in the complex sale to a sophisticated market, those buyers want to know that you're serving great purpose, but actually they want to know how you do what you do. How is just as, or maybe more important as why in the complex sale. I want to know how I can be sure I can believe you. Right. And company genius is the how. And the how has had a bad rap for a lot of years. Oh, don't get into the detail. Don't get into the detail. Company genius is not the detail, but here's how we know we can promise what we promise, because this is what is super clever about us as a company. Does that make some sense?
It does, because I think, and I agree with you. I think purpose is important. It rallies internally people to want to get excited about working with an organization if you're an employee. Yeah. And I think, it's great for an organization to stand for something in the world. And at the same time, I agree. Customers want to know, how are you going to actually do this thing for me? Yeah. Because they're really placing a bet. They're trusting that you have the capability and that you're going to deliver this thing, whatever that thing is, this complex solution for them. And they kind of want to know how that's actually going to occur before they trade dollars or sign a contract. And, we work on large complex sales. So I've seen this play out time and time again. And people literally ask that question. How are you actually, what does it really look like? is actually
Yeah.
what it sounds like. Or how are you going to do that?
Yeah. I like, what does it really look like is actually a how question, not a what
Yeah.
question, right?
Yeah.
And, put yourself in this situation. I had a fairly catastrophic back injury in Mexico in 2019, right? And my wife was in LA. We're in Australia. I was in a wheelchair and in extraordinary pain and things like that, and in tequila. So I had to get to Guadalajara airport and then back to LA. And the doctor in LA said, just get on a plane and go back because this is not good. And if you have the surgery here that you need, it's, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you have free medical in Australia. So I'd
Right.
suggest you go home, right?
Yeah.
So, um, long story short, we live in Perth, but the closest city was Sydney, so we went to Sydney, get the surgery in Sydney, or get it fixed, had an MRI done, and the neurosurgeon saying you need surgery. And I'm going, well, like everyone says, don't let anyone operate on your back. Like, what if I end up on a wheelchair? And he made possibly the greatest pitch I've heard anyone make. And he said, so being in a wheelchair is not your real problem here. I go, it's not? He goes, no, you could live your life from a wheelchair. Permanent incontinence is your problem. You can't travel like you do if you're permanently incontinent. And we can't guarantee that you won't end up in a wheelchair because you're in trouble, mate.
Yeah.
However, here's how we do this so we can make sure that we protect all organ function in the lower half of your body.
Wow.
And he stepped me through and he said, this is like, by this time, it's like 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And he said, I've already reached out to the spinal surgeon and he's driving in because this should have been done within 12 hours. And you're now 2 days past that. The nerves are dying in the lower half of your body.
Yeah.
And they're dying by the minute. So here's how this is going to go down. And he stepped me through and he said, so, you're going to come out with normal organ function because this is our approach. And I've got to tell you, this was the kicker that let me make the decision. I got to tell you, this is traumatic for you, but it's bread and butter for the surgeon I'm calling in. He does this every day. Right. He does this to. I believe you now.
Yeah.
And that whole conversation was not a, hey, why do you want to do this? Like, why do you want to walk again? Like, why do you want to have your spine repaired properly? Why do you, none of those, like, here's how this is going to go down, right? And I'm hearing a neurosurgeon saying he's the best spinal surgeon. I'm hearing this team saying this is the collective genius that we bring to the operating table. And I was on the operating table at 11 p.m. And I've had a 98% recovery. So, of everything.
Yeah.
So, how is in the complex sale is just as important as why, maybe more important. And I'd love to just draw a model.
Absolutely. And for those of you that are listening on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts right now, we're around the 30-second minute mark. So if you want to jump over to YouTube, you'll be able to actually see the model that Simon's going to draw for us.
Just let me know that you're seeing this full picture at the moment.
Yeah, wavy line left to right. Looks great.
Perfect. So I became a bit obsessed with the idea of company genius and what does that actually look like? And if we think about company genius, and I really first started unpacking this on a gold mine on an island off the northeast coast of Papua New Guinea. I was doing some organizational work for a mining company up there, and 80% of the mine are operated by Papua New Guinean nationals who come from 800 different tribes who in their R&R are actually warring with each other in their villages. But you want them to work together safely on a mine site, right? And so I was looking for a framework. And they speak Pidgin English. It's not their first language. So organizational design's tricky because they don't read SOPs and things. So how do I get these people to hold this together in a unified way? And that's when the genius model first started to emerge. And then that sent me on this hunt for what is the origin of organizational genius? What is the origin model? My first realization was organizational genius always starts with a who, which is the founder or the originator of the idea. And there are three things to this. The first one is, what is that person's philosophy? And, what is it that they believe to be true about the thing, right? So let's take a well-known company, Apple, right? If we think about what was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak's philosophy about computers, right? Well, beauty of design. There's that famous story that one of their technical people put together a motherboard that just was scrappy. And Steve went, what the hell, And he went, well, it's inside the computer. No one will see it. And Steve Jobs went, but we know it's there. Like, make it beautiful, right? Simplicity of function. Like, they had philosophical views about the thing that, transcended everything else. And then what is their history, their high story? So particularly, what are the wins? And then what are the lessons? So, life is wins and losses, but we get a choice. We can make the loss a loss, or we can turn it into a lesson. And so people who create something usually are people who turn the losses into lessons. So what are what is the high story of life, the history, the wins you've had and the lessons? And then what is the expertise, both formal and informal? So education and experience. And that then turns into a what, which is the big idea. And that has 3 components. One of them is context. So what is the context of this thing that we do? Let's go back to Apple again. What's the context of what they're doing? Well, there's these people making computers and stuff, and I think they're kind of rubbish because, we know that one day there's a famous conversation he and Bill Gates had, and they were debating fixed point technology versus floating point technology. And Bill Gates is saying, Steve, there'll be a grid, there's going to be arrows, and people will move around the screen based on arrows. And Steve leant over and said, no, Bill, one day people are just going to put their hands on the screen and move it around like this. He didn't have the means to do it yet, but what's the context? And so he had this context that, computers should contribute to people's daily existence. And then there's the concept, which ultimately became the Apple computer, and the mouse, which created floating point technology, right? And think about where we'd be today if the mouse had never been invented, right?
We'd be living in a keyboard era.
Yeah. Trapped in a grid.
Yeah.
Trapped in a grid. And how much more difficult would everything be? What I'm doing right now, drawing on the screen, wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah.
And so then what is the consequence?
Right.
And so now one of the issues is context is often the first thing that leaves the sales conversation. When people are selling, they often drop down to here's our thing, meaning the product, and here's what it does, and context leaves the conversation. The third part of company genius is how, which is delivery, which is speed. Everyone wants things done faster. Ease. Everyone wants things done easier, and leverage. Everyone wants to get a bigger bang for their buck, right? I spend $100 with you, I get $1,000 worth of value. So the problem with this is the founder story is so important in driving the genius of the company. And while the founder is still there, active, frontline in the business, genius holds together because the founder is often in the sales conversations. And the founder is always the best salesperson for 2 reasons. They have the story in their head. They are the origin. Mm-hmm. And so they speak with the authority and the passion and the believability. The second reason is they can cut whatever deal they want to make the sale, right? We'll discount this for you, or we'll load this extra value in. Salespeople don't have that authority, right? They have to operate inside some guide rails. And so I meet so many founders that go, I'm the best salesperson in the company, but I can't get the sales team to sell as well as I do. Well, that's because they aren't a part of the company genius. And so, I was figuring out how to turn this into a model. Then the other thing, and this is such an important thing I really would love people to get, as that company grows, because to scale a company, you must scale the sales first before you scale the delivery. You're overcapitalizing if you haven't scaled your selling. And that means you're going to have multiple generations of sales team past the founder. First generation, they then become the sales leaders, second generation, and so on. And the further away that founder story gets from the company, first generation of sales team, second generation of sales team, third generation of sales team, this gap emerges, and all the sales team are selling on now is what and how, and they sound like everybody else.
Right.
As the genius gets diluted, if you haven't codified that genius in some way, as the genius gets diluted, the company automatically becomes commoditized. The problem most companies have is not commoditization in the marketplace, it's internal dilution of the founder story and company genius. And so this thing no one ever talks about, company genius, right, can be codified, can be captured, can be turned into a visual framework. So what if we just teach everybody in the sales team a simple visual framework that they can walk a customer through? So if you're going to go and sell warships to the US Navy, you say, we believe right at the center, there should be no souls lost at sea. Founder story, right?
Mhm.
Here are the three big outcomes we have to build in to every vessel we build and sustain in battle. And this three-legged stool is exactly how we do this. These are the levers that we pull to make those outcomes occur. This plus this equals that. This plus this equals that. This plus this equals that. Everything we do is about putting you at the heart of the model. Do you want those things? Yes, we do. Okay, well, here's how we manipulate those levers, these 9 core capabilities we've consciously designed into our organization to be able to deliver this solution to you. How does that sound to you? Why hasn't anyone else ever explained it to us this simply before? Right?
Well, you're distilling, I think you're distilling, as you said, a 75, 70, 80 slide PowerPoint presentation, which I, as the buyer, I'm not going to remember. And you're forcing, slides are linear and they're not a model. And so
Correct.
I have to try to build the model of those slides in my mind as the purchaser to
Yeah.
figure all this out.
I love that.
Whereas what you've done is you've said, oh, here, I'll do that work for you. I'm going to make this
Yeah.
really easy. I'm not going to make this complex. I'm going to make something that is very complex. We do something that has a great deal of complexity. I'm going to simplify this into a model that you could probably go draw for someone else. And now you have them because they're there with you and they can feel like a partner in it because it's easy for them to understand.
Yeah. Mike, you are so right. Like we often teach our clients some key lines. So the other thing I added to the models was choreography. I studied stage magic and comedy, which are the two most powerful art forms to trigger curiosity in someone's mind, right?
Right.
And it's the art of the punchline, right?
Okay.
And what a punchline does is allows an audience or a customer to hold a paradigm that they believe to be true for a period of time, and then you hit the punchline or the reveal, and it collapses that whole paradigm and introduces a new one that they now can't ignore, right? And so we build real choreography through the models, and every model has its own unique choreography. Like there's no accident in how I just walked through those last models with you. And, so we often say to people, you need to say to your customer, life is not linear. And so we don't draw a flow diagram. We use models because we can dip in and out of that model in a non-linear way according to what you want to ask me about, right? And we actually encourage our clients to actually draw rather than use PowerPoint.
There's something so powerful about what you just did, Simon, because I was realizing as you were drawing the model, had you shown me either of those models as a whole, I would have been very distracted jumping around the various pieces of that model, trying to make sense of it. And I would then build my own narrative and my own choreography in my head because I can't help myself. I'm staring at an image, right? And what you did instead was you said, no, I'm going to do the choreography. I'm going to show you how your brain should navigate this model in a way that makes a lot of sense and will be easy for you to remember and much easier for you to share with someone else. And I noticed it as you were doing it. And I'm like, this is so much better than having shared the whole model with me.
Absolutely. I speak at a lot of conferences and I speak on stage with my iPad in my hand and I draw and it goes up on the screen behind me. Conference organizers always say to me, can you send us a slide deck? I go, there's no slide deck. But what do you mean? I go, I'm just going to draw while I'm on stage. And they go, well, how's that going to work? And I say, just the same way. I'll give you my computer, you connect it to the screen and then I'll do everything else, right?
Right.
And my iPad talks to my computer and then I draw up on screen. And people are always taking photos of my screens and people always want my PDF file of what I drew afterwards. And, I don't have any ego about this. I'm usually the highest rated speaker at the conference because I'm the only one drawing, right?
Right.
And look, there's a reality in that the digital sine wave, I spent the first part of my life in electrics and electronics. And, the digital sine wave is an on-off sine wave. And so, digital TV, you've got picture and you've got blue screen. And the cutover is instant. That's the digital sine wave. It's ones and zeros, right? It's a yes or a no. And then we put them together in multiple ways. Now, when you use, say, PowerPoint, that's a digital presentation because it's click next, and then nothing happens on screen for a while until the next click next, and then nothing happens on screen, right? Digital. The problem is humans are analog. So the analog sine wave has shades of gray all the way through. Now, you can probably remember, like me, analog TV had a picture And then you had a whole lot of snow until eventually
Yeah.
the picture disappeared altogether, right? And
Absolutely.
you're in a holiday cottage somewhere and there's an important sports match you want to watch, and
Yeah.
all it had was the little bunny ear antenna on
Yeah.
top of the TV and someone standing in a weird way trying to get a picture to get the snow, right?
Yeah.
Well, humans are analog, and it's this space here that where these spaces. So if you're using PowerPoint, you've clicked. It's a one. Look what came up on the screen. Now you're talking, and they're getting distracted through here. But drawing is analog. Like there's a lot more happening on the screen here, piece by piece, because I'm drawing than you could ever do in a PowerPoint click through. You'd be just clicking constantly to get this stuff to happen, right? But I'm drawing. And drawing draws people in. The other thing about drawing is it's deeply psychological, in that the first thing we all drew as kids, or the first thing any of us put on paper as kids, were really bad drawings, right? Almost
Yeah.
indecipherable. But our parents went, "That's amazing. You're Picasso. We're going to frame that and put that on the wall." And we got this
Yeah.
great
It's on the
emotional
fridge.
feeling out of it, right? The oldest form of captured communication is drawing. Cave art, 60,000 years, our indigenous Aboriginal people, right? So we have this deeply rooted connection to drawing. And when you draw, people kind of just can't get drawn in. Like, it's a very, very powerful process. So what we are actually encouraging people to do is capture, codify your genius. Certainly use it on PowerPoint, but when you know the model, you'll make more sales off the back of a napkin drawing that than you will in a corporate presentation in a boardroom. But most importantly, for the founder-led companies where the founder is still in the business, but it's scaled and it's at the point where the founder is no longer the primary point of sale, internal dilution may well already be happening. And what are you going to do about that? For us, codify the core genius of the company into a visual framework. The other thing that it does, think about how powerfully aligning that is. So now we actually have organizational design, culture, and genius codified and captured. And someone comes into the company and you hand them a document, a manifesto that says, this is the genius of the company. This is our purpose. This is the impact we have in the marketplace. This is our culture. Here's who we want to be, how we want to show up, the character we want to have. And here's our genius. This is the capability we bring to the marketplace, all explained for them. We'll get to organizational design later. What we want you to do is take those things away, study them, and then come back and make a presentation to the executive team, 15 minutes long, on who you think we are and how you think we operate. Right. Or how you think we solve the problem in the marketplace. What a high pressure yet informative induction for someone to go through if you have that material. But how many companies would have the ability to say to a new senior employee, this is our genius. Now you come back and give us your interpretation of that? None. So it's a super powerful thing to codify. And there is one other big point I'd love to address, but I just want to make sure that if you've got any kind of thoughts popping in terms of anything I've just been talking about, I'd love to close that loop. And then there's one other thing I'd like to sort of emphasize for people.
I think a reflection that I'm having as I'm listening to you is the reality of the history, the philosophy, and the experience. Philosophically, I think you can share that with people and say, this is the philosophy of the company. This is why we do what we do. The history, I've been doing this for 25 years. The history and the experience that's there is really hard to, put into a document. I think case studies attempt to do that, where you're trying to capture a piece of history and a piece of experience and then hopefully weave in some philosophy into that at the same time. What I love about your model is that it's active. As you say, it's not digital, it's analog. Yeah. And it gives people an opportunity really to go on a journey with you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm taking you on a journey of understanding how we're going to partner together.
Yeah.
And that just feels so much more engaging. And it's something I want to be a part of, and something that I can very simply understand than would, a super long proposal or a big PowerPoint deck or, a whole bunch of case studies made it together that, you have to assume I'm going to read, which might not always be the case. And yet you can do that same thing, as you say, drawing it out in a far more engaging and, far more engaging way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a whole body of work that sits underneath the model. When we do this with companies, it's deep thinking, actually. It's not uncommon for people that do this work to then sort of comment, I haven't thought that deeply about my company ever. Right. Now, depth of thinking is the only true market differentiation there is. I want to repeat that. Depth of
Yeah.
thinking is the only true market differentiation there is. Everybody else is trying to differentiate in the marketplace, but they're saying all the same stuff as everybody else. It's depth of thinking that is the true market differentiation. And, you can capture that original genius that has then been added to by collective genius into a visual framework with the body of work that sits underneath it. But what a lot of companies try and do is capture the founder's story, and everyone knows the power of story, but the founder's story does not leave the breadcrumbs to what the real genius is. And so, there's this art form in codifying how that founder's original thinking infused itself into the organization, into, simple visual frameworks. And then picture the typical corporate proposal type document, which is wall-to-wall text and charts and spreadsheets, right?
Yeah.
And we all know that great copy, great writing addresses the fast and slow reader path. Mm-hmm. We use bullet points and headlines for the fast reader, and we fill all the detail in for the slow reader. Take that same corporate proposal type document now and picture it with a visual model that addresses why this is important, a very simple iceberg that says, here's what this is actually about, 3 levels, simple at the top, profound at the base, and then a genius model says, here's how we do it, and then a futures model that says, and time is ticking, so here's why you need to make this decision today. And they're visual models. What's anyone going to remember out of that document? Are the visual models, right? They become these massive neon lights inside that pretty boring brand corporate style proposal. And anyone that's hired people knows what it's like when you've just read 20 resumes, and they're all kind of the same these days because they're all done on AI. We live in a commoditized, noisy world because there's so much more content being shoved out, and everyone's marketing is sounding the same. And so, you stand out by demonstrating your depth of thinking. But it's even more important than that. We live in a world that is enclosed inside, boom and bust markets. There's a continuum, boom to bust, right? And then the line running through the middle. And let me do it like this. So, if we imagine a boom market and a bust market, and then a line running through the middle. At any point in time, everyone's marketplace is one side or the other of that midpoint. And if you've created something clever that you've brought to the marketplace, your job is to point your company genius at the market for where the market is at. Meet the market where the market is at, right? So if you on the boom side of the line, and sort of you're in an emerging or an actual boom market, everyone's buying everything. Boom markets create a buffer for lazy marketing and sales. And everyone does well, right? And so you point your company genius at a boom market, it's easy to start thinking, oh, we're really good at this. We've got a really clever thing here, right?
I think the expression that I love the most for remembering that is, if the wind is strong enough, even a turkey can fly.
It's absolutely true, right? Absolutely. I love that analogy. But then when it's a bust market, you need to point your genius to the market in a different way. Your offer might have to change. The way you position the first purchase might have to change. I mean, in a boom market, you can sell high ticket easy. But in a bust market, you need a no-brainer first offer that reduces the risk. Because in a bust market, risk is the predominant emotional concern. In a boom market, desire is the predominant emotional concern, right? And so you've got to reduce risk in a bust market. And so your offer might have to change from, hey, here's our full ticket price and it's amazing, to here's a safe way for you to start, the no-brainer first offer. So it might, instead of in a boom market, you can go in with a block and go, here's the whole thing, buy the whole thing. In a bust market, you need to go in with a wedge that can find its way in, the no-brainer first offer that has a safe investment level for them that then exposes the rest of the block sitting behind it, right? So strategy has to change. Here's the thing though, a boom market doesn't make your genius any smarter, and a bust market doesn't make your genius any dumber. Your genius is your genius, and it's what you lean on to create your solution, your offer, your products and services. Your genius it doesn't get any dumber or any smarter as the markets change, but how you package it and point it at the market has to, if the markets move into uncertainty. We do live in a highly uncertain world now. And so in an uncertain world, people will have to think about how they package and deliver their genius to the marketplace and move to a wedge rather than a block. You know, when the market's up, everybody's selling and the turkeys are flying, right? But in a bus market, the turkeys have to figure out how to become a little more streamlined, to stay in the air sort of thing, and have to learn how to find the rare wind that there actually is to be able to stay up. You know, thinking about your company genius is so much more significant than just saying, you know, what's our process for building this product or delivering this service. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about what's our process. As you said, the process is linear. The reality is we're really clever at what we do, and that can spawn multiple products and services. And this one, we think, is the best wedge to point at a bus market, because that gets us in and then allows us to tick the other ones. Mm-hmm. In a boom market, let's sell the whole thing and just go for it, you know? So it's a pretty big conversation.
It reminds me of the work that Daniel Areli did in Predictably Irrational around pricing psychology, right? And I love this example of, particularly I think when we're currently living in a time where there's tariffs being bounced around the world, and it's creating economic uncertainty in the stock market, that tends to have people go into that wait and see mode. And even if it's not a bust market, when there's uncertainty, that causes hesitation, which can almost be a self-fulfilling prophecy towards a bust market. Yeah. So I think I love what you're saying, that, you know, to simplify, I guess, you know, if we're going to go with turkeys, don't try to sell them the turkey, tell them to sell them the turkey nuggets first. Yeah. And when they love the turkey nuggets, they're going to come back and buy your whole turkey.
Well, no matter the market, commerce still happens.
Right.
Right. No matter the market. And you know, as long as you're running a good business, sometimes things happen that can wipe out your entire market. You know, a government policy change, you know, a new technology that hit the market and swept it so quickly. Look at what AI has done to so many industries. Like, would you be a contract lawyer these days?
Right.
Because everyone can go to AI and go, hey, write me a contract for this. And it's doing a pretty good job, right? Yeah. And it's reduced contract lawyers to document checkers. So, you know, and write it for me in this jurisdiction too, by the way, you know. So, you know, a technology change can wipe out an industry. A government policy change can wipe out an industry, but commerce still happens in those industries. There's just, so you've got to find a way of pointing to it that makes sense. Like an interesting example would actually be, you know, environment or DEI or something like that. There are markets that emerged where the commerce was hanging off compliance.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to do this. Therefore, look, let's take a less topical thing, taxation, right? You have to fill out a tax return. And so therefore, tax accounting emerges as an industry, right? But governments around the world, and certainly the Australian government, is doing everything it can to remove the tax agent from between the taxpayer and the Australian Tax Office. You know, in Australia, we have moved towards your tax return is done by exemption. In other words, the ATO says, we know exactly where you landed at the end of the financial year. This is the position. If you have exceptions to that, tell us. So if you've got claims and things that we didn't know about, tell us. Yeah. But they have visibility on bank accounts. They have visibility on company payroll. That everything is, they can look at everything.
Yeah.
They go, this is where you've landed.
Right.
So the average tax return now is done by a tax agent that charges $30, as opposed to an accountant the whole industry. Now the ATO is rapidly moving towards, we want to actually remove the tax agents between companies and the ATO. You know, where are you going to point your genius at as an accountant? Because if you were a tax only accountant, your whole business is built on compliance.
Yeah.
And compliance can get killed overnight. But you're still an accountant. You still have that genius. How are you going to point it at the marketplace? Commerce is still going to take place, but you need to point it at the market in a way that brings value to the market rather than ticks a compliance box for them. So, you know, commerce may be the oldest thing in human existence. We've always transacted and traded. Commerce always takes place. The job of leaders, and particularly the leaders of company genius, is to constantly be figuring out how we point this at the market in the current market conditions. So a company should be able to thrive in any market condition, boom or bust, or everything in between. What that really means is a company's genius should deliver robust value that is always transformational and important to people, no matter the circumstances they are living through. And so, where we're at right now in the world is very different to what COVID felt like.
Mm-hmm.
In COVID, there were like two speeds. There were the companies that were and industries that were absolutely booming, and then there were the companies in the industries that were absolutely dying.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot in between.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that were booming were a bit bullish about it. This is great. They didn't want to say it out loud and in public because everyone else down here was dying, but they're going, this is great, right? I feel that I experience a very different sentiment right now. We do have some companies and industries that are doing well, and then a lot that are struggling. But the companies and industries doing well are actually suppressed. They're not being bold. They're not like, let's go for it and everything else, but we're doing okay, right? And then the companies down here are really, really it's a different kind of feeling of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this dates this episode, but this notion of bust markets and uncertainty versus boom markets and a sense of confidence is like COVID, tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what the trigger is. We're moving backwards and forwards across that scale all the time. The founder leader's job is to make sure your genius, your company genius, is pointed at the market in an appropriate way. Boom markets don't make you smarter. Bust markets don't make you dumber. Package and deliver meaningful value that your company genius, can demonstrate a real capability to deliver, that people believe you. People see you go, here's how we approach this. And people go, I believe that. That's smart. That's deep. That's wise. Okay, well, how does this work? Oh, well, let me walk you through our service. Let me walk you through, our solution. Yeah.
What's so powerful, that's this piece around commerce. The thing you said, commerce is always happening. People are in the market, they're making purchases, and our job through all of this and being able to describe who we are as an organization and what our genius is to remember what cycle of the market that we're in. And if we're in a boom market, we can go with our high ticket items. And if we're in what we think is more of a bust market or approaching that, we need to make it easier and lighter for people to be able to do commerce with us. Simon, I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast today. And thank you for sharing your genius with us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure. It's just been a joy, Mike. And it's good that we got to finally do this.
Right.